Good morning, Drexel Hill Middle School students, staff, community members, and distinguished guests. We once again have gathered here this day to take a break from education, to put our holiday plans on hold to do something incredibly important, to fulfill our duty to pay tribute to the countless brave Americans who have died while defending the liberty of our fellow citizens, not just of the United States, but of the entire free world. It is with this in mind that we require all in attendance today to conduct yourselves in a manner befitting of a memorial ceremony. If it helps, think about the way people normally act at a funeral when they are honoring a loved one. That is exactly what we are doing here today. We are honoring hundreds of thousands of loved ones that have died for this country. This ceremony is a time to focus and reflect upon the sacrifices made throughout our country's history in the name of freedom, and to contemplate what role we each have as citizens to remember that sacrifice. At this time, I would like to ask Ms. Holstein, our lead teacher, to come to the podium to introduce our special guest speaker for this morning. Ms. Holstein.
Good morning. I am honored today to introduce our Memorial Day keynote speaker, my father, Dr. James Holstein. As a young man, he enlisted in the Army. He served as a captain in the 1st Cavalry Division of the Army and retired at the rank of major. During the year he spent in Vietnam, in addition to being a soldier, he worked as a field surgeon in a battalion aid station. The importance of honoring those who have served our country was instilled within my brothers, sisters, and I at a very young age, not only through my father's words, but his actions. I am honored today that he has agreed to share a few of these words with all of you. It is my privilege to introduce my father, Dr. James Holstein.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here this morning. I would like to again thank your principal, Mr. Salerno, for inviting me, but also for coming back and sitting through my talk a second time. I would like to vary the beginning a little bit. I was remiss when I gave my talk to the 8th grade. I would like to congratulate the student body in general on their rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner and the Pledge of Allegiance. That's not something that you hear in every school every morning. I would also like to thank the members of the orchestra and the singers. They did a magnificent job. What I'd like to do is spend a few minutes talking to you about how my perception of Memorial Day changed. When I was your age, Memorial Day meant the soon coming of summer, the end of the school year. It meant that you could stay outside longer. It meant that I could play my baseball games without having to do homework first. But it also meant a visit to the cemetery at St. Charles Church. I grew up not too far from here in Lansdowne. My father and my uncles served in the Second World War. And every Memorial Day, they would have a service much like this at the cemetery. The graves of the deceased soldiers were decorated with a flag. There would be prayers, there would be taps, and a plane would fly over the ceremony dropping flowers. Once the ceremony was over, we went about our business. The barbecue started, the swim club was open, and we returned to our normal routines. Over time, I graduated from Monsignor Bonner High School. I went to Villanova. I graduated from Jefferson Medical College, and I did my internship and started my surgical residency at Fitzgerald Mercy Hospital. At the end of my first year of residency, I got a letter from the Department of Defense telling me that I had been assigned to the United States Army based on my surgical skills. I was to report to Fort Sam Houston, Texas for 6 weeks of basic training, and from there I would go to Vietnam. After my basic training, I flew to Vietnam, and I was assigned to the 1st Air Cavalry Division. At that time, the Air Cavalry Division was a little different than a typical infantry unit. Typically, an infantry unit is moved from place to place by trucks, jeeps, tanks, and what other vehicles are available. The Air Cavalry Division moved entirely by helicopters. There were helicopters to transport troops and supplies. There were helicopter gunships, and there were medevac helicopters. I underwent additional training involving additional training with an M16 rifle, learning how to throw a hand grenade, learning how to find booby traps, how to rappel out of helicopters, and learning what I could and could not say in the event that I was captured. Following that training, I was flown to a fire support base in the middle of the jungle in Vietnam. The support base or fire base is a very interesting place. It's a little bigger than this classroom. It's occupied by roughly 100 infantrymen, an artillery battery, and a mortar battery. There's no electricity save for the generators that run the radios. There's no air conditioning, there's no lights, there's no TVs, no radios. The average temperature is 120 degrees. I find myself in the middle of the fire base, and I'm now the doctor for approximately 800 infantrymen who are on the fire base and out in the jungle surrounding the base. You might envision a fire base much like in your neighborhood if there was a particular person that didn't tolerate children very well, but right next door to them was a beautiful field, and you and your friends decided every day, I'm going to go to the field and just play there. This would eventually elicit a response from the angry neighbor. They might come out and chastise you. They might go so far as to call the police. That seemed to me to be the thinking of the placement of the fire base. We knew where the enemy was, so we just set up store right next to them. My office on the fire base was a first aid bunker. This is essentially a 9-foot hole in the ground, which is covered by timbers and multiple sandbags. The more sandbags you could fill and put on the aid station, the more protection you had. So needless to say, we spent a lot of time filling sandbags. Because of its location, you had to constantly wear your helmet and your flak vest, and you always had your rifle with you. My days were spent trying to address the needs of the troops at the fire base, making sure they took their anti-malaria pills, making sure they drank enough water, making sure they took their salt tablets, and attending to any injuries they may sustain. In the event of attack on the fire base, my job was to treat the injuries and to coordinate the medical evacuation helicopters. After doing this for several months, I went to the battalion commander and said, I'd like to see how the troops handle it out in the field. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said, why would you want to do that? And I said, I think it would give me a better sense of what their life is like. He said, all right, but he said, you have to do one thing for me. He said, tonight, you bring your rifle and you come up on the berm when we have Mad Minute. What Mad Minute was, every night, everyone on the base had to get up on the dirt wall which surrounded it and fire every weapon you had out into the jungle. So I did that. I realized that in the magazines that I had, every 5th round was a tracer, so he could see exactly where I was firing my weapon. After I did it, he said, okay, I know you can handle your weapon. He then told me that if I went out on the supply helicopter, he couldn't guarantee that they would come back and pick me up. So he said, make sure you take extra magazines of ammunition, take your flak vest, and wear your helmet. The next day, I got on a helicopter and went out into the field and spent time with one of the companies. And it was a very interesting experience. You realize that even although the fire base is a very difficult place to be, it's much better than being out in the field. At least at night, I could sleep in a bunker, and I was surrounded by a lot of people that were most interested in keeping me alive. One of the trips that I took on the supply helicopter was when one of the corpsmen came to me and said, there's a supply helicopter going to Saigon. I think we should go to the 3rd Field Hospital. This was a 1,000-bed hospital in Saigon, much like the hospitals that you have here at Delaware County and Fitzgerald Mercy. The difference was it was air conditioned, they had running water, they had flush toilets, they had clean sheets, and they had food. So we get off the supply helicopter, we go into the emergency room, and we start basically stealing everything we can get our hands on. We were taking pressure bandages, we were taking iodine, we were taking peroxide, we were taking IV tubing, all the things we needed on the fire base. In the midst of this, I look up and there's a nurse standing there in a starched white uniform, totally out of context with what we're wearing. She looks at us and essentially says, what are you doing? And we said, well, we're just borrowing all this stuff. I also noticed that she was a lieutenant colonel and I was a captain. So I figured I'm in big trouble. I have stuff stuffed in my helmet. I have stuff stuffed in my flak vest. I have stuff in my pockets, and we each have rifles. We immediately left, got back on the supply helicopter, and returned to the fire base. I fully expected at some time in the future the MPs would show up and arrest me for stealing material from the government. Instead, what happened was several days later, I got a radio message to report to the brigade surgeon. I figured they've turned me in, I'm going to go to prison. When I reported to the brigade surgeon, he said, I hear you've had a few adventures recently. I said, yes, sir, I did. And he said, well, I'm going to take you out of that environment. He said, I'm going to send you to Tainan, where you'll be the commanding officer of a clearing company. Now, the clearing company basically had 2 doctors, a dentist, and 30 corpsmen. We had a much larger treatment bunker. We actually had electricity. And believe it or not, we had a rudimentary shower. We didn't have running water, but we had a bucket that we filled up with water, and we just stand under it to take a shower. I felt like I had just arrived at a 5-star hotel. On the base camp, there was the headquarters of the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division, a brigade of the 25th Infantry Division. There was an airstrip in the middle of the base camp, and adjacent to the airstrip was an inflatable Army hospital. This was a very interesting building because it was maintained in its erect position by large fans, which just blew air through it and kept it inflated, but it was equipped with all the latest technology. While serving there, I was responsible now to coordinate the medical care of an entire brigade, which consisted of 3 battalions, 3 battalion surgeons, and multiple corpsmen. The battalions were out on fire bases surrounding the base camp. Periodically, they would be attacked or mortared, and we would be responsible for rendering aid when the injured were evacuated by the medevac helicopters. One thing they forgot to tell me was that Tainan was also known as Rocket City. What that meant was that every night there was a rocket attack or a mortar attack. Since we had a helipad right next to our bunker, we always had a helicopter parked on it. We were pretty nice targets for people to take shots at. But over time, you became comfortable in your environment and life went on. One thing I realized in my years in medicine is there's a reward in helping people, but the thing that stays with you is the longest are the people that you can help. That was brought home to me very quickly one night in April of 1970 when one of our fire bases was attacked and overrun. There were multiple casualties. They were continuing to come in by medevac helicopter. 3 of the medevac helicopters were shot down during the night. We treated as many as we could. We evacuated the rest to the surgical hospital. The next day, one of the corpsmen came to me and said, Doc, the body bags are starting to arrive. On a battlefield, the last people evacuated are those that do not survive. So these were the remains of the soldiers who were killed during the attack on the fire base. I don't recall exactly how many, but I think it was upwards of 60 soldiers had been killed. Our job was to open the body bags, view the remains, try to determine the cause of death. More importantly, try to identify the deceased and make an inventory of any personal effects that they had on the body. Sometimes the bodies were not complete. The only thing we had to identify was a boot with a dog tag on it. After processing all this, needless to say, we were emotionally exhausted. Soon after we completed that, the chaplain came over and asked if he could say a prayer over the remains. I accompanied him into the room where we had placed all the bodies. He said a prayer, and I said, "Chaplain, would you mind saying a prayer for us?" And he did. As we're leaving, he said, "That was a pretty difficult day." I said, "Yes, sir, it was." And he said, "Well, I'm reminded of the phrase in the scripture that says, 'Greater love have no man, but he laid down his life for another.'" And that's what these men did. And to me, that is what is the essence of Memorial Day. 1.3 million soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen have given their lives for our country. We should never forget that. Some will give their lives today. So if you have friends in the military, if you have relatives in the military, at some point in time, thank them. I would also suggest that you take a moment over this holiday weekend to just reflect on the 1.3 million people who have died. You also have a school which is in a very unique relationship to Arlington Cemetery, which is right across the street. Maybe sometime you could walk through the cemetery and stop at a grave where you see an American flag. Buried somewhere in that cemetery is Peter Mackey. He was the first Marine to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for service during the Civil War. Once again, I would like to thank you for having me come to school today and talk to you. I hope I've given you some indication of how I feel about Memorial Day. Enjoy your day, but remember the people that made the sacrifice that allow you to do that. Thank you.
This time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Kirchner, Ms. Schneider, Ms. LaRue, and our concert singers to perform a song for an unsung hero. All across the country this weekend, elected officials and dignitaries will be presenting memorial wreaths at various sites in order to honor our fallen soldiers. This morning, as we always do, as a part of our ceremony, we will be doing the same thing here. I'm proud to be joined by two fantastic citizens of the Drexel Hill Middle School community who will help us with our wreath-laying ceremony. We have 7th grade students Melania Dia and Nina Yako. As a part of their creative writing classes, both students submitted essays answering the question, why is the Constitution important to me? And their essays were selected as winners. Let's give them a big round of applause, please. Melania and Nina will present our memorial wreath at the base of the American flag. This will be followed by the playing of taps by Kieran Sala, and then a moment of silence. At this time, we ask all in attendance to please rise silently. Thank you. Please be seated. I would now like to introduce Mr. Merzak and the members of the Symphonic Band to perform The Great American Frontier. In closing this morning, I would like to give our students an idea of the price that has been paid in the name of freedom, your freedom. I'd like to echo Dr. Holstein's sentiments and talk to you about the freedom to speak your mind and protest, no matter which party is control of the government. How much do you think that is worth? The freedom to have various forms of news media to inform us, the citizens of this country. Can we put a price tag on that? How about the freedom to practice a religion, or if you so choose, to not practice a religion? What would it cost to keep that? I would like to leave you with a quote from our 32nd President of the United States of America, Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who once said, "Those who have long enjoyed such privileges as we enjoy forget in time that men have died to win them." Again, think about Dr. Holstein's words and his story, his own personal stories, and the quote that says that those who have long enjoyed such privileges as we enjoy forget in time that men have died to win them. Of course, today we equally honor servicemen and women, but the sentiment remains crystal clear. A key component of our nation's greatness lies in our ability to honor, appreciate, and cherish through our actions and our memories all those who have died to ensure our freedom. As you enjoy your holiday weekends at the pool, down the shore, at a barbecue, studying for final exams, please remember that Memorial Day is a special holiday, a single day during which we honor the spirit of all those who died in service to our great nation. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Schneider, Ms. LaRue, Mr. Kirchner, and our concert singers, Mr. Marzak and the Symphonic Band for performing so beautifully for us this morning. I would also like to thank Ms. Holstein for organizing this ceremony and for her father, Dr. Holstein, for taking time out of his day to join us. I want to thank you, students, for your attention. I want you to have a great holiday weekend. Remember what you heard here this morning, and I ask that you please exit the auditorium in the same manner in which you entered. Teachers, when you're ready, you can begin escorting your classes back to class. Thank you.